I am so friggin' thrilled to speak with Layman Pascal. I love you, Layman Pascal. I'm really glad to hear. Congratulations on the wonderful book on Gurdjieff. Like I noted, your book makes me want to learn about Gurdjieff, which I think is extremely important and not enough introductory text or overview text or kind of introducing strike that balance. Often you'll have a book about a thinker that makes you feel like, okay, I get the thinker. I don't need to study them anymore. So you actually give up on them, or it feels very, dare I say, boring. I found your text on Gurdjieff one that makes you want to go into Gurdjieff and to actually explore these things. Various distinctions like the difference between integration and, say, higher consciousness, the idea that suffering has some sort of spiritual practice. I'm also very taken by the ideas of, I believe he did cuisine cooking. We were just sharing stories about how I've almost killed myself multiple times trying to cook things, dancing, etc., so forth. And to think of these as all actually not optional, but it really, in a sense, necessary for, well, more nutritious experiences. That's a phrase you've used that I use all the time. But the first thing I want to ask is I saw your book was banned on Mars. How are you holding up? Are you doing okay? How are you doing, Layman?
I'm all right. We've mounted a couple of interstellar legal challenges. We think we're going to get that overturned, but for now, it's just good publicity.
But the problem is like the court fees, right? Even if you win, you're bankrupt because you have to pay the court. I mean, what are the rates in the internet, like the intergalactic station?
Oh, it's unbelievable. Like, if I didn't have serious economic backing from certain anonymous individuals, I wouldn't be able to do this. I feel really bad for people who don't have that kind of financial support and have to undertake these sort of interplanetary cultural and legal excursions.
But I think it's wonderful that you've gone through the Gurdjieff practices so you can integrate with such strangeness, so you're actually able to handle the galactic courts that have banned your book on Mars. Because that's just a great example where you've got to be able to handle strangeness that is thrown at you that's not expected. That really doesn't just seem to be an intellectual matter, because if you were just thinking or going to college, you would never be taught that you would need to be ready for an intergalactical court system so that you could like not go bankrupt. So it makes me think, why is strangeness such an important principle to be able to integrate with or to experience and to think? And why, as kind of a principle, is there something spiritual in a way, or spiritual practice about thinking through something like an encounter with strangeness? Because I know that's kind of an idea that comes up with Gurdjieff, because your ability to handle this very terrible court case in the intergalactic court is going to be corollary with your capacity of gone through these sort of spiritual practices. So how do those things go together for you, Mr. Layman Pascal?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. You can make a lot of contemporary cognitive arguments about why strangeness is needed, like John Vervaeke marshals a number of theories about why you want to prevent your sense-making apparatus from over-optimizing. And in order to do that, you have to constantly stray past that barrier because there's no way, given the combinatorial complexity of the world, that you can accurately guess where the boundary of reality is for you.
Mm.
So you're going to definitely over-optimize under that boundary. You don't want to go completely crazy, but in order to constantly find that boundary, you have to cross back and forth to find it, like a comedian trying to find what's the appropriate line with a social group. So you have to like risk the offense and then dial it back and constantly shift that way. So in order to find your actual boundary edge, you do have to risk constant movement into strangeness. So that's would be like more of a contemporary neurocognitive argument. I'm very partial to a kind of archaic shamanic argument, which is on the one hand that there's a certain percentage of the population that's definitely more tuned into strangeness as one of its necessary vitamins, and that these are the kind of people that we would find and train up to be the priests in a village or a community of some kind. But also that just the let's say the sheer panoply of complexity and weirdness that we see in the natural world is something that human beings tend to edit out,
Mm.
right? We're like, maybe the right brain can handle that, maybe the subconscious can handle that, but generally as humans, we want a law, we want a square, we want a triangle, we want a straight line, we want to be able to speak to each other comprehensively about well-known political topics or whatever the deal is. But when you look at what the rest of the universe is doing, It's so unpredictable, so computationally irreducible, so peculiar and strange that anybody who has any moment of raw experience, whether it's meditative or through inner effort or through psychedelics or something like that, suddenly beholds the fact that this is an extremely weird position to be in. And that
Mm.
if you can't handle that, then you're not, as an embodied being, capable of encountering and assimilating the energy intensities necessary for you to adapt to a richer layer of the patterning of the universe.
Mm.
So you could say that for the organism to make more sense of reality, to understand more completely, it has to be able to constantly dare and bear the peculiarity of a complex world whose meanings often struggle against themselves and often exceed our conscious ability to map them.
That's a brilliant answer. And it's funny because as you know, I was thinking about the word strangeness, thinking through Gurdjieff and some of the talks that you've been having, like with Brendan. I thought that was a wonderful talk. And then where you did the talk with yourself with the shaved beard, that was a spiritual practice. That to time it and to think it, that was meant to, that was like what'd you say? As you're cutting the grass, listen to a complicated podcast while simultaneously being grateful for reality. That's actually really hard. I was having to weed eat the other day. I was like, okay, let me be grateful too, as I'm getting hit in the face with rocks. It's like, oh, yeah, they're also, but I was grateful because there was a moment where a rock hit me in the forehead, a little pebble, and I went, wow, my glasses are not on. I almost went blind. Huh. There was a moment there. But it's interesting because the word, something I was thinking about is how we talk a lot about complexity and complicated. And one of the things that I guess while I was reading Gurdjieff, because I'm really taken how much our thinking, we've talked before and I'll talk about like with Postman or Lakoff or Hofstadter on how our thinking is metaphorically structured, whether we like it or not. And part of the problem is our thinking, metaphors are not merely decorations of thought, like an I.A. Richards would say, but literally the kind of form, the avenue by which it unfolds. Like I.A. Richards' famous experiment is he has four groups and he gives them different metaphors. Education is like a river, education is like a tree, education is like a garden. And then he has them come up with a philosophy of education. And what he shows is that the very philosophy of education that people come up with is completely tied to the metaphor they use. So there's always something like a background. And what's very interesting is I was thinking I really am taken. I would love to, if there's like special Gurdjieff recipes from his cuisine cooking, I would really enjoy that. And, it's very interesting to me because what kind of thinking would you do if you did cuisine cooking or if you did dancing, right? And for me, a way to think about what Gurdjieff is often getting at on the necessity of, beingness, spiritual practice, where if you don't actually engage in these new practices, your thinking and your life are going to be structured by backgrounds, metaphors, or backgrounds that you don't even realize are occurring. So, for example, why is it so often a word you hear to describe, complexity theory, right? Well, because a lot of these people are probably academics, college professors, maybe computer science. Complexity is a very technical, mechanical word. Well, why not strangeness? Strangeness is, for me, a word that's much more environmental, eco, like it's forest. It has much of an environmental flavor to it. But complexity is strange, right? That's the whole issue. It's like you get all these irreducible parts, something occurs that's unpredictable. So there's a strangeness to it. And you can say, oh, come on, Dan, calling it complexity versus strange it is or something like that. What's the big deal? Well, there is a big deal here because when you hear the word complexity, you approach it and you can't help it. As a metaphor, you go, oh, I need to get good at computer science. Oh, I need to get good at modeling. Even if the whole idea of complexity from a Snowden or whatever is the entire idea that you can't predict it, the whole idea has some sort of feeling of technological logic to it, right? And yet you could kind of, in a way, if you just reworded it as strangeness, then it would bring an entire different way to think about it. And maybe it would bring in different emotional, cognitive, biological, kinetic faculties to bear on the problem, right? And it to me right there is just an example too of if you never do cooking, if you only are ever doing particular practices, you really actually don't frickin' know or even really get how much your thinking is structured by the practices you do, and by extensions, the ones you don't do. And one of the ways I was just thinking about Gurdjieff as I was reading your book is this awareness of it really does matter. You can't separate, and I'll give it back to you. You can't separate what you think from what you do, because what you do often provides a metaphoric, if you will, background that structures your thinking without realizing it. You may not even realize that calling it complexity in of itself frames the approach that could in a way hinders maybe the environmental side that needs to be brought into account, or the social or communal side that brings into account. But let me throw it to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of value in looking at it through a metaphorical lens like complexity, but you're right that it overweights the technical mode,
Yeah.
which is in some way the very thing that sabotages our ability to sort of viscerally, multidimensionally work with complexity. And Benito Roy does kind of lead in the direction of making that critique against systems theory a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Strangeness is a very interesting way to language this. Like, it opens up some new conceptual territory, and at the same moment, it invites in a lot of people who, secretly or not so secretly, have been oriented toward the peculiar their whole life, as if that was the privileged sense-making territory. And I think in some ways it is. Right, if you're going to deal with complexity, you have to risk cognitive dissonance, and then you have to try to create new integrations or new blends out of decentralized systems that you're never going to be able to completely get on top of. And when you do achieve some kind of temporary successful blending that exceeds the level of understanding you previously had, it's going to contain a lot of novelty. So you see that in cooking, right? It's a matter of taking the most beautiful cooking shows to me are the ones where they give everybody like, here's 10 random ingredients. And you watch them try to create a higher level harmonious blending in a purely novel way out of this random stuff that the complexity of the background systems have handed us. There's something about actually living out those processes that gives us an instinct for how to work with the strangeness and not merely try to map it back into non-strange territory, even though there's a very legitimate use for that kind of back mapping.
No, I think that's spot on. Well, it makes me think one of the things I was thinking about is, obviously, like in the First Testament, Second Testament, there's all these different names of gods, and many traditions have this, right? Like if you refer to Jesus as a lamb, then he's a rose, then he's a suffering servant. What's very interesting is that it's a kind of intentional metaphoric confusion that keeps you from ever falling too much on the side of one, right? And so if we're going to think spirituality today, kind of the metamodern spirituality, there's a certain practice there that is suggested by different names that keep you from falling into a different cognitive rut. Now, part of the issue is say, well, let's not call it anything. Well, you can't do that because, because then you can't, you have to have words and language to orbit, but there's a certain always wait a minute, I've been calling it complexity too long. Let me spend 2 weeks calling it strangeness. Okay, I've done strangeness too long. Let me spend 3 weeks talking about some other term, vitalism or something. Let me bring back something old that, that's going to bring back. Okay, I've been talking about complexity. Let me think it through a Benito Roy framework. Okay, let me think of it. And actually, there's almost a kind of practice on forcing yourself to use different words to refer to the same thing, because that kind of throws your brain off, right? Like if you've spent 2 months talking about complexity theory, you say, no, I'm going to be really intentional about calling strange theory. Well, that's confused. Your brain's automatically confused. You're thrown off. And yet there seems to be something important to that, not where you are just saying, oh, I'm going to just use one term for it, but almost a practice of forcing yourself to name different things, which then I was thinking with Gurdjieff, one of the things, it really, to me, I've been thinking a lot about intentionally okay, I really need to force myself to garden more. I really need to do these things that literally, if I do not, I am going to be trapped, if you will, on certain paths, certain sort of modalities of thinking, and not even know I'm so trapped. So that was something I was thinking, but let me throw it to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing there. When you think about metaphors and you think about ideology and society and you think about the level that habit is playing in all the levels of our own experience, we need something that acts to us as the signal that we have an opportunity to make efforts or have experiences or gain impressions that are outside of what's pre-constrained by those hidden patterns. And strangeness or maybe freshness, novel, something like that. There's some kind of visceral signal that says right now you have the opportunity to move outside of those patterns. And what kind of wisdom can you gain from those spaces? One kind of wisdom you can gain from those spaces is you have to remember to intentionally make efforts to escape from those hidden patternings. Another one is you have to get better at appreciating and assimilating things that have the quality of that strangeness so that you can have a less biased perception of what's going on in the system. So in the Gurdjieffian work, there's all this emphasis on effort and struggle and trying to get outside of those things, but there's also a lot of emphasis on perception, on novelty. All right, what are the mechanics of how you profitably take in a new impression of some kind? And he comes to that in a lot of different ways, but I think one of the ways that's really important is in his communication style, which is even though there are a number of books trying to introduce his work or take deep dives on various aspects of it, I think personally too many of them fall into the trap that you mentioned around the word complexity. Too many of them make too much sense of what he's saying, when he was often going out of his way to use new terminology, to switch things up, to use non-words, to communicate to the subconscious, to create odd juxtapositions, to reinvigorate a sense of strangeness and freshness as the privileged method of communicating complex understanding that will lose most of its value if it's simplified to the layer at which we go, oh, I understand what that's saying, and that's very profound.
It's very interesting because one of the ways, and maybe this is incorrect, but the way I've been thinking about kind of just reading Goethe, because there's almost a sense of the moment something makes sense, that means you need to do something different. Like we tend to associate making sense with, oh, keep going. But there's a way in which making sense is actually warning, you're no longer integrating. Because there's something interesting too. A way I guess I think about it is with, I'm quite a fan of Alex Ebert's freak theory and the notion that there's a certain saturation point. And then there's a phase shift, you have an relations become relatas once they saturate, et cetera, so forth. But the point is that there's a certain saturation point that then can function as a signal of a change, right? Now, in nature, it might be a more organic, automatic process, but with human beings, it's almost like, okay, you need to stay, and I'll just keep using this example. Okay, you need to stay in complexity as your metaphor for a bit when it doesn't make sense to you. So you stay there, but once you start to say, oh, now it makes sense, that's when you've reached the saturation point. That, though, here's the issue with human beings. It doesn't automatically transition like it can in nature, right? Humans have to almost choose, it seems. You go, but the funny thing is, once something makes sense, it seems rational to keep doing it. But actually what Gurdjieff is suggesting is that's precisely when you need to do what I would say a non-rational choice and now do something else, right? Because you're feeling the saturation point, which again starts creating a sense of comfort. And again, there are all these interesting reversals here where we tend to associate comfort with evidence you've made the right choice. Making sense means this is the right metaphor, where it's almost like Gurdjieff is like, no, well, now we got to take up cooking. Okay, now we got to take up that. You've literally got to do something different now, precisely when you feel like you shouldn't. And I would almost say, and I'll throw it to you, it's almost like, too, with this, it doesn't seem like integration is possible without struggle. And it's very interesting because I'm also curious, there seems to be much more of an emphasis on integration over higher consciousness. Not that the term higher consciousness is necessarily bad. It depends on what you mean, obviously. But a reason why I find that very interesting is because sometimes we can associate higher consciousness with, in fact, not feeling pain, not going through difficulty. You've kind of figured things out, where there's something about integration that's, I got to fit it together, and they don't fit together. I have to make the ingredients go together. And there's something about struggle and integration that seems like it goes together. But then the question is, when do you engage in struggle and not just be meaningless struggle? There's always that question, right? Like I could right now, walk downstairs on my knees, right? I could intentionally do struggle, but it could just be stupid, right? So how do you determine when struggle is actually productive, dare I say, or constructive in this way? And it seems to have something to do with when stuff starts to make sense, too much, too clean, that's when struggle is needed. That becomes the kind of mark of when you need struggle. Otherwise, then it's almost like you need to trust that you need to keep doing this thing and not actually from a nervousness struggle. Well, that opens another thing, because I think what Gurdjieff seems to understand is how it is not obvious when you should make transitions to different things. It's not obvious when you should do it. Like that discernment of when you need to move more in a struggling direction or when you need to move more in a maybe solace direction is actually not obvious. So you kind of need spiritual practices by which to discern that. Let me throw it to you.
Yeah, it's not obvious, and the way in which it's not obvious may differ from person to person, right? I think one of the things that the Gurdjieffian traditions do really well is they're hyper-individualized, right? There's no this practice suits everybody, or here's when you all have to make this transition. So there's a sense of attuning it to the individual. There's a sense, obviously, in a practical way, if you can find somebody who's good at it, then they can give you some feedback about how to do it. You get apprentice, mentor, teacher, student dynamics. That's a good one. A lot of it's practical though. And like you say, you can look for maybe I can isolate a signal that is a signal about when I should do these kinds of practices. And then also maybe I can look back and say, is this practice having any success? Like I give it some leeway because there may be time during which I have to struggle. And part of my struggle is I don't know if this is working at all. That's part of the struggle. Okay, but if I've been doing that as my regular practice, right? If I'm going to the retreats and sitting silently and motionless for 30 days at a time, and I look back over 20 years and I haven't changed that much, then maybe that's an indicator the practice needs some more complexity, some more freshness. And there may be, like we were just saying, qualitative indicators such as strangeness that are good signs that you're on the right track. In the Gurdjieffian approach, and he was very hands-on with giving out suggestions so that he could kind of regulate that with you, but it's temporary and it's personal, right? It's not like, here's your karma yoga practice, do this for the rest of your life and tell everyone else to do this as well. You go, this is for you. It's our best guess about when you need it and how to counterbalance your tendencies for growth. And also, don't do it in perpetuity. Take it on as an experiment and then stop after a while. And also understand that 24/7 dedication to your highest ideals is not the best possible thing because we exist in these different states. Just like we have to go to sleep at night to integrate material from the day and reset our organism, you may have to move back and forth between the times when you're doing intentional struggle and subjectivity consciousness work and times where you're not thinking about it at all, where you're just getting stuff done in those sort of over-optimized, this is just how we do it kind of ways that we might call sleep if we're using the old-fashioned Gurdjieff metaphors, or like human AI is how I've been thinking about it the last couple of weeks. We're trying to get human general intelligence because what we're currently running on is human artificial intelligence, and the new AI systems are reflecting that back to us, and we're wondering when they're going to get to AGI, but we really should be putting some effort into when we get to HGI. Right? But you can't just jump to HGI. You have to sort of build it and then go into artificial and build it and go into artificial and work your way into it as any other maturational process would be in an organic system.
No, I think that's brilliant. And one of the things I was thinking about on Gurdjieff, and it comes to mind what you were saying, is that there are all these feedback loops that can be problematic. There are all these almost game theory dynamics that seem to get a life of their own and control us. And a lot of the feeling today can be a sense of kind of helplessness. So what I mean is, for example, you can always read another philosophy book. You can always have another conversation. You could always name another group. And there's the Han Burnout Society. There's this feeling of falling behind, attentional economy, making new content. There's this feeling of a kind of, oh my gosh, if I don't like constantly stay on the hamster wheel, I'm going to fall behind. There's actually a kind of freedom, in my opinion, from that Gurdjieff offers, because actually, if you say are just reading philosophy and not gardening, then you're actually not controlling the background, and I'm just thinking about it as metaphors. Therefore, you actually are falling behind. So there's a certain freedom from various kind of, all these game theory dynamics, these accelerationisms, to use that more metaphorically, or these kind of like burnout dynamics that you feel like you can't escape. But once you really take seriously that actually it's not an option to go learn cooking as well, because otherwise you're going to be trapped in a certain way of thinking, like a Kafka hallway you can't escape, or a certain value form. One of the, Michelle Bowens talks about value form competition. I know Gaffney and Mr. Stein will talk about values. Another way to think about it, if you don't do any of these practices, then you will have a value form. You will have a form that you value things according to, and you'll be trapped in it. You won't be able to escape it, and then you won't even be able to know you can't escape it. It's like I always reference that small little story from Kafka, a little fable that David Foster Wallace liked as well, when the mouse is in the hole and he's like, oh me, oh my, I've been in this hole and the walls are closing in and there's a trap up ahead. What must I do? You simply must change your direction, said the cat, and ate up the mouse. And there is this feeling of, in all of these kind of modern dynamics, if you will, postmodern, however you want to put it, there's a way in which I just call them dynamics. There are these dynamics that feel like they control you beyond your own agency. You're just kind of caught up in them, right? Well, it's really hard to rationally come up with a reason if you really want to like understand the world. Well, isn't it always rational to read more philosophy or to, watch another podcast or something? So rationality, in a way, can't ever get you out of a dynamic that leads to a various burnout. But if you take seriously, oh, wait a minute, I really need, again, as I'll put it, non-rationality, I need to engage in other practice. I literally then need to stop doing this and do something else, or I will be pre-framed in some sort of structure of interpretation that will actually get in the way of whatever learning or whatever I could have benefited from, like reading philosophy, precisely because I have only one metaphoric frame in which to fit what I learn. So there's a kind of, for me, when Gurdjieff beingness, I know there's actually a way in which if you take all of this seriously, there's a kind of freedom it offers to you from these dynamics that kind of take over, that kind of control you and feel like you've just got to always kind of keep up. And so I found that valuable, but let me throw it to you.
Yeah, a lot of that rings true for me. I think one of the major things that comes across in all of Gurdjieff's work is this attempt to distinguish between knowledge and understanding,
Mm,
right? And knowledge it operates from a conventional consciousness that's basically socially embedded and socially programmed, and it forces you just into the next form of social servitude that you interpret as yourself. And
mm,
that can be the next mode of activism. It can be the next news story that you have to take a position on. It can be the next book you have to read to keep up with your peers or whatever that is. And Gurdjieff is saying something more like, don't worry about that next book. Reread the previous book. Reread any passage. It's about how you do it, not how much you do.
yeah.
Right? Can you read it with your mind? Can you read it with your heart? Can you read it with your body? Can you read it with your subconscious? How many different kinds of internal information streams can you access this thing through? And then can you do some work which will initially feel like struggle to integrate those together so that it becomes part of your lived experience, part of your beingness, so to speak. Right? So that's a huge part of this. Now, people like Brendan Dempsey will argue that that's that metamodern type thinking, that level of complexity gives you some leverage over this, right? That if you get to pluralistic cognition, and then you get to like a meta cognition around the pluralism, you start to understand there's an endless sequence of recursion which you can participate in as an evolutionary journey and or suspend appropriately in order to get back to a sort of sincere ironic appreciation of reality. So there is some, and this book goes into that, natural kinship, I think, between the level of sociocognitive complexity we're pointing at under metamodernism or integral or anything like that, Hegelian thought, those sorts of things, and these sorts of existential developmental moves that Gurdjieff is pointing towards. So I think there's a real sense in which those can cross-pollinate each other. But the main thing seems to me that Gurdjieff was way out ahead in thinking about your internal life as a plurality
Mm.
and your spiritual life as an interaction between multiple modes, multiple aspects of the self, multiple identities, and the work that it takes to get those to be a functional team together. And if you don't get a pluralistic, complex inner team, then your simplified sense of self, to what you were just saying, is automatically, let's say, enslaved by external forces, by the egregores, the ideologies, whatever it is. And we sense that about each other, right? When the world starts to make too much sense, you seem like you're just you and you're just having your responses in your circumstances, any critical observer standing outside that would go, oh, he's fallen back into the ideology, he's fallen back into his habits, he's fallen back into his addictions, whatever it is. So, right, we really are enslaved under those conditions. And Gurdjieff thought and wrestled a lot with, why are wars happening? Right? Why
Mm.
are we periodically getting together, not only slaughtering each other, but wrecking a lot of our inherited cultural wisdom in the process? Because one of the first things the warlike movement usually does is I mean, I remember as a kid watching the Taliban blowing up Buddha statues in the desert. Like, why is that your first move? Some kind of collective psychosis has gone on, and one of its features is wreck our inherited wisdom. And those things seem to operate around individuals who have dropped into an overly simplified sense of self, which is not taking any responsibility for the struggle in the complexity between the plurality of the beings that we are.
No, that's very well put. You know, one of the things, a way I've been thinking about, because obviously you have the delusion individual, you have this notion of a collect, like you can think of the self as an ecosystem, you are an environment, not just like a single individual isolated phenomenon. Well, that can sound to many people perhaps discouraging. Oh, I'm just some kind of schizophrenic, confused entity or whatever. But another way to think about it is that you are a kind of fail-safe system where you have many, many parts that can make up for the failures of one another. So it's actually a really good thing you're a quote-unquote individual, right? Because like your brain has a tendency to do that which will destroy you if left to its own devices. Likewise, your stomach, if left to its own devices, will get a lot of processed food and kill you. Like every single part of you is actually out to kill you in a way, or to make your life suck. So you need to be individual precisely to have checks and balances on the other parts of you, and also to have fail-safes. Oh, your brain failed? You're not able to figure things out? Well, don't worry, you have a body, you have a kinetic system, you have emotion, so I've got you. Like by having many parts, you have parts that can say, I got you, I got you, I got you. But here's the issue. The fail-safe does not necessarily work if you don't train it. And if you overemphasize on one part of it, your brain may get much stronger than the other parts of you. Therefore, they're not strong enough to be fail-safes anymore because the brain has become too overly exercised per se, right? So if you don't engage in different practices, you don't maintain all the parts of your system of fail-safes, if you will. Because a way to think, a forest in a sense, not to overemphasize fail-safe, but a forest entails a lot of fail-safes, right? I mean, if the tree falls, then it can turn into acid, makes new soil, there are seeds. Like an ecosystem is precisely a system of a whole lot of fail-safes. It's anti-fragile is another way to put it, right? So the very fact that the human is a individual, it composes of many things, that is a necessary precondition for the possibility of anti-fragility and to be environmental, right? If you were just one thing, there would be basically no possibility of anti-fragility because anti-fragility almost seems to necessarily be relational, like many parts that are working. It has, in order precisely to go through the process of difficulty and actually come out through it, there has to be different parts that can take different difficulties at different times, at different intensities, and so on and so forth. So by humans being individual, by entailing many parts, that's actually a good thing because then we have systems of fail-safe. But because it is very natural, because the brain is typically to start on the side, to use Hegelian language, of understanding versus reason, then we naturally experience things as one thing. And so it becomes very easy to interpret ourselves as one thing. And the thing we tend to experience most readily is the brain, because when you think about what am I, you automatically in that act move to the mental register. So then it is just very natural to slip into unconsciously an understanding of the self as one thing. You therefore practice really hard on that one thing to the point where the rest of the fail-safe of your body doesn't work, which then makes it seem like you're not a system of fail-safes. It doesn't work. So that just proves you were right. Wait a minute.
And there's a tremendous architecture of social reinforcement for you going into that mode, right?
Yep.
Because people address you that way. They want to insist that you join them in a particular belief system or self-assertion. And if it turns out there's something you're good at, they want you to just maximize your ability to do that thing until it destroys you as part of the machinery we're embedded in.
No, that's exactly right. And so then if everyone's telling you that's the right way to go, your brain naturally experiences things as that's the right way to go. Why would you ever think you're in a Kafka hallway? Why would you ever think you're the Kierkegaardian despair? The one in despair is the one who doesn't know they're in despair, right? By definition, the only way to break out of that would almost have to be something you would originally experience as strange. Like it would have to be, because it goes against all of the social reinforcement. It goes against the way you naturally experience things. It goes against the dynamics that you're in. And so it has to have a kind of strangeness to it. And again, why I that word is to me very interesting to emphasize is because I do wonder if terms like complexity, not that I'm against complexity science or anything, obviously it's really important, but it is funny how words like that may be easier to integrate into the social reinforcement in a manner that even as you talk about complexity being irreducible or unpredictable results, that can actually be something you get used to. And thus you tell yourself, oh, I know what complexity is, but actually, practically speaking, you are still acting like an individual versus a individual per se, because you fit it into your cognitive apparatus to where it doesn't move you into strangeness anymore.
There's a beautiful chunk, a mimetic chunk in the Gurdjieffian lore, which is around the first meeting between Ouspensky and Gurdjieff. And Ouspensky was the great early proselytizer of the work. Very interesting. You know, he was the Ken Wilber of Russia in 1910. You know? And a lot of the way even the Gurdjieffian traditions phrase and frame their own work comes down from Ouspensky, but he was a very different character than Gurdjieff. And he recounts the story in Search of the Miraculous, which is his posthumously published, constantly reworked story of his interactions with Gurdjieff. And he sets out as a journalist in Russia and as a mathematician and a specialist in integrating and synthesizing New Age understanding. He goes to India. And he goes everywhere. He talks to everyone. He's looking for the ancient secret transformative knowledge, and he doesn't find it. And he comes back kind of depressed. And then a friend invites him to lunch at this cafe, and he meets this guy there. And his impression of this guy, he says, he gave me the impression of a man who was poorly disguised. Right? There's something about the strangeness that you're invoking here of like, I was looking for it in all the places where you would look for something that's existentially and spiritually transformative to human beings. I didn't find it there. I found it here where I noticed a person being somehow weird. They were giving me signals that they weren't quite what they were. It was off-putting to me in some peculiar way, and that turned out to be the seed signal that I was now on a developmental journey that could work for me, especially as a person in the contemporary civilization.
Well, I think that idea of one of the problems is we have to decide the meaning of signals and emotional experiences, right? If you've been trained to associate weird with wrong direction and making sense of with right direction, why would you ever think that weirdness is the way you need to go, right? But of course, the problem is you're always already socially configured to make those assessments. And if you're not forcing yourself to do practices like dancing or jazz improv or weird painting or something, then you haven't had the lived experience of how doing something weird can actually generate something good. So like a lot of artists, for example, they have kind of weird rituals in a way that they go through in order to get into the headspace to write a story. And then they do weird things in their note-taking. But it's not, but the problem is we're culturally used to the artist doing that it ceases to be weird to us. It's like, oh, well, that's just what artists do. But if you think about the lived experience of it and you didn't know the outcome, there is a kind of weirdness that is going on into all of these practices that you see in, say, many writers or different things, right? But we read the biographies, we get used to it. But the key is that what you see in that is actually weirdness is generative, right? And doing things that are unpredictable and don't fit into a box are extremely generative. If you don't see weirdness as a signal, well, then I certainly hope that you already have everything you need in life. Because because the only way weirdness would always be bad is if you were already set, right? If you already knew everything. Weirdness is precisely like, it's hard to imagine growth without weirdness, right? Like maybe another problem is we metaphorically, well, I mean, I think honestly in your technological age, we associate growth with moving from false to true, wrong to right. Oh, I have the right knowledge, I have the right information, therefore I've grown, I've developed, I've gone from first grade to second grade to third grade, right? So then right there, the only way we associate growth because of how we're socially reinforced is moving into greater understanding, into greater right answer. you don't really feel weirdness when you take a test in school. You don't feel weirdness when you write an essay. I don't think you feel weirdness when you code. You go, oh, that was wrong. You feel wrong. You may feel stupid. You may feel dumb, but you don't really feel weird. Weird is a unique emotional experience that is different. But we're not trained to associate weirdness with growth and development, where we are trained to associate it with feeling dumb and then not feeling dumb, or feeling like you get it right. But then maybe that's also what's very interesting about it, and then I'll give it back to you, is a lot of actually, dare I say, meaning, meaning crisis is actually a product of doing the weird, not the right. One kind of develops and life becomes more meaningful when you do weird things, or things that are hard to explain, or things that you only get by doing. And if that's an entire category of activity that you have been conditioned or socially practiced into, not even thinking you should do, then you will cut off all of those possibilities for finding something like meaning, and then go in the direction of trying to be right to find meaning, which is precisely the direction you won't find it in. And then when you don't find it, why would you ever think you missed something? Because that whole horizon of weirdness was closed off from you. You're constantly at risk of these kind of foreclosures of these avenues you can go into, simply because of your own reinforcement of how your mind works, because out of the soul society reinforces itself. And if you're not intentional about that, you're going to end up in a Kafka hallway and not even know it.
Jordan Peterson made an interesting argument in his first book, Maps of Meaning, that the feeling of meaningfulness is an indicator that you're taking essentially constructive action in multiple scales of reality simultaneously, right? There's what's good for me right now, there's what's good for me over 5 minutes, what's good for me over 10 years, and what's good for my loved ones tomorrow and next week, 10 years from now, all that kind of stuff. And he made this argument that when you feel meaningfulness, you're actually getting a signal from the system back to you that your action across multiple scales is aligned. But he's also a notably kind of fragile and reactive person in certain respects, right? And we might say that the actual signal could be something closer to strangeness. It could be that peculiarity of some kind is giving you that feedback. And we don't see that very clearly because we exist in a civilization and historical context where there's been exclusion or domestication of our shamanic types. As a result, they're not around to make weirdness honorable and teach people the skills of doing weirdness well, right? And you mentioned if people are not leaning into weirdness in a certain way, then we hope they've got everything together. But there's another element to it as well, which is a person who detected that their weirdness evaluation system was compromised might legitimately lean away from it as well. Because we can say it's important to train up everybody's subsystems, right, including your gut. But if you're the kind of person who's just pouring 2 liters of diet soda into that gut constantly, and you grew up getting beaten at church or whatever it was, then do you have a reliable gut? Do you have a healthy gut? Has it been educated, and is it fundamentally healthy? And if your response to weirdness is fundamentally disturbed, it might be reasonable for you just to avoid the entire area until you can be cultivated, trained, rehabilitated in that area. And you would need shaman type weirdness workers in the system to help do that. So the first thing, I mean, Gurdjieff's critique of modern pedagogy is really interesting. And you could boil it down into we have to be training in all these different modalities that operate these different intelligence systems. And then in addition to healing and training each of those, we have to be training the meta skill of their coordination, their teamwork, so that they can function like whatever you were saying, a safeguard of some kind, right? A decentralized anti-fragile system where they can counterbalance each other's frailties. And then in addition to those two things, right, train up each of the systems, train the systems to be able to maximally or optimally cooperate with each other. And you need to be leaning into seemingly negative experiences to see if you're not rejecting some possibilities of the coordination between these systems, or rejecting some valid incoming weirdness signals because they feel overly associated with the negative, right? So you need it's like Keats talked about the negative capacity in poetry. There's this other kind of negative capacity where you have to be like, oh, wait a minute, maybe humility and loss and the confrontation with the weakness of my will and my inability to be the good person that I am, right? All these, maybe these kinds of negative experiences are good and I should lean into them. because that will help reset my instinct for what kind of weirdness I should actually invest in, rather than blocking out legitimate weirdness just because I over associate it with something that's emotionally or socially negative.
No, I think that's brilliant. And, you know, as you were speaking, I'm kind of thinking, because I like the idea of meaning as a kind of signal of a stack. And I wonder if if we take beingness, you know, the kind of idea, maybe we could imagine a building with, I don't know, 20 stories. I'll just make up something. And when you start, when you're younger, meaning maybe there is something where moving from wrong to right with the test, working on the faculties of rational feels meaningful because you're on levels 1 through 5 of the building. And you get a signal from the first 5 levels of the stack that this is what you need to do. But then as you get to be, say, 15 years old, you move from stacks 5 to 10, and then there's a different signal of meaning that you actually need to feel. Where if you don't, now you actually need to move more so into the emotional life, actually. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to feel the signal from floors 5 through 10, and it won't feel meaningful to you, which then could make you say, oh, what I did before was meaningless. Well, whoa, hold on. No, it was meaningful at the time, but now the signal has shifted, not because you made a mistake, that would be wrong, but because you need to actually move to a different spiritual practice per se. You need to focus on something else. And it's interesting because I like that if we think of the signal of meaning as something that kind of moves as at 5 levels of the building at a time per se. You know, it's like 5, you know, yeah, there's the future, there's the present, there's the past, there's a career, there's a responsibility. So you're doing all that. But actually, once you get to 22, if you continue to do that, it loses meaning because now you're not further moving into beingness. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And then it would seem like weirdness comes further up the stack. But it's not really a hierarchy, it's a fullness, right? Like it's kind of like there's a fullness of the person. It's not saying that the weirdness is necessarily higher than the rational development, because the only way you get to the weirdness and it not destroy you like a Lovecraft creature is precisely the rational development. But there has to be this movement of the sense. So what's interesting too with that is there's some sort of skill of sensing the stack, like sensing the stack. And meaning in this sense, if we use it as Mr. Peterson is putting it, meaning then is kind of like a sense of the stack, to kind of just riff. Like you smell something, it's a sense. You see something, it's a sense. You taste, there's a sense. Where meaning is kind of a sense of where you are, because senses almost always have a locational effect, right? Like if I smell cookies, I'm near the kitchen. If I, you know, if I taste cake, then the cake is located on my mouth and it's dinner time. Like there's something about senses and location that go together temporally and spatially. And so it's almost like meaning functions kind of as a sense of where you are located in beingness, in development, right? And so then, like, we wouldn't, I find it interesting because we don't really talk, like, you don't really have cookie or taste, or like, do you have sight? What does that even mean? Like, I guess you use sight, right? You use smell, right? So when we say, do you have meaning? There's a way in which maybe metaphorically, it's more like, are you using meaning as a signal for what spiritual practice you develop in is? Are you using it as a signal? In the same way, are you using the smell of cookies to go get a cookie? Are you using the sight of what's in front of you to act? Like, what are you using it for? And that sounds utilitarian, but it's for beingness, so it's a bit different, and it puts a call on your life. And it's almost like, if we think of kind of perhaps meaning as a sense, almost a sensual experience, like it's an experience of a direction to go in, that is a signal of multi-levels of the stack, and then that stack changes based on location of life, then the lack of meaning is not like, oh, you made a mistake in life or you're screwed up. It's that you're not where you need to smell what you need to smell, right? You're not where you can smell the cookies. You need to go somewhere to get that sense. And what Gurdjieff is pointing is like, yeah, but it's a matter of new spiritual practices, of doing different things. Like you're in that cup. Yeah, the Kafka hall is meaningless, so get in a different one. Take up dancing. Take up gardening, and then that changes the metaphoric background that structures your thinking, your associational logic, and that opens up different things. And now you're moving from floors 10 to 15 or 15 to 20 in terms of beingness.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And the caution that I would add to that is there's a possibility that people can adopt that whole framework. You can imagine the high-powered tech CEO who believes he's got to constantly be doing new things, but for some reason, to everyone else, he seems to have flatlined a little bit, and he's constantly reinforcing a narrow ego structure in that doing, right? So that there are hidden dimensions to the way we approach that, right? That's why very often historically they'll say, well, you need a teacher or you need a community, you need the feedback from the others so that you're not constantly choosing the particular kinds of novelty and strangeness that reinforce your underlying structure. And then the other element of that, the principle that underlies that, is to lean into your suffering in some ways, because the suffering shows you which elements of potential strangeness you've been ignoring or rejecting. And it's not as simple as suffering all the time or, lacking play and humor. Gurdjieff was a fun, interesting, playful, profound, artistic human being. So it's not about becoming masochistic in your existential temperament, but it is about teaching yourself bit by bit to intentionally lean into your typical patterns of suffering so that you can, A, gain some energy from that friction, but B, most importantly, make sure that you're not significantly distorting your sense of where to find the strangeness that moves you forward across that stack. Because if you have hidden areas of resistance, then your sense will be distorted in that area.
No, I think that right there is very big because there's a problem of, is it really strange if you're able to say it's strange or to pick it? Like, how strange is it then, right? Like when you say, oh, that's ineffable, well, there must be a certain limit to that ineffability, the very fact you're so this is what's interesting to me. We've been, Jockin, there's a few things. So first off, it's interesting in Aristotle, and Jockin will emphasize this, when Aristotle talks about wit, he's not necessarily just talking about the ability to be funny in a kind of Oscar Wilde sense, although that's actually important for relationship and friendship, that capacity. But wit also almost functions as the ability to kind of judge the middle term, the invisible middle term, that the means that's going to make relationship in a community possible. You have to have this ability to see something that isn't there, that if you don't see, the thing falls apart, right? So likewise, you have to have a sense of when the strangeness is no longer strange anymore, when it's no longer meeting you to develop you. You have to have a sense of, yeah, sure, you're calling it strange. Yeah, sure it is. But actually, beyond that labeling, there's some sort of invisible force that you have to be aware of, that you're participating in, that is very difficult to keep your eye on, right? So you always have to be putting yourself in a place where the middle can emerge, if you will. But what's interesting is wit then is always relational. Wit then is always communal. It emerges between people, that then the middle is there. If it's just you relating with the strangeness, it's almost like the middle is not possible because there's not something there that can surprise you. Here's the key point. Like wit is a response to surprise. And it's really hard to surprise yourself, especially in a deep way. I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's kind of like, Zizek talks about the ticklish subject. It's hard to tickle yourself. You actually can't. It's really weird. You're like, you can't tickle yourself. So there's a kind of limit to what you can surprise yourself. Now, there are practices of, spiritual practices, psychological practices where something is repressed you didn't know. So there are kinds of surprises, but the kind of surprise, there's another kind of surprise that requires the other, that then requires this ability to then respond to something that emerges, that is wit. And the reason I say all that is then this would suggest philosophy should be in the business for the capacity to respond to the surprising, you yourself surprising yourself. And then it's almost like we're talking about that stack. Then there's the next level of the surprise between people. And you almost have to go through the process of finding out how much of a surprise you are to yourself as an individual to be prepared for the surprises that emerge between people. And there are different levels of spiritual practices. But I find it very interesting, like if we think about dancing, right? Dancing is so interesting because it tends to be what? Performative in front of other people, right? Like cooking, you tend to serve the food unless you're just cooking your own food and you're not, just for yourself. It's very interesting to think about these things like dancing as a kind of spiritual practice that then forces you to put yourself in front of other people where you can be surprised by their response, the fact that they didn't like it or how they interpreted it. And then the spiritual practice is figuring out the middle to meet them in that surprising response that forces you to, on the fly, figure out what the best response is. That's probably going to require emotional regulation, mental regulation, not blowing up, not being overly indulgent. But putting yourself in a place where you have to work really, really hard at something to then be able to do it well, and then people may still hate it, right? That seems really like, as the artistic act generally, and cooking is like this, like you cook for children, no matter how good it is, they hate it. So that could be a spiritual practice, you know, and you have to decide how you're going to respond to the children that hate your omelet that you worked really hard on and think is really good, but they don't. And what's the wit for the response to that? Like, that requires this capacity, and that without that kind of system, it almost seems inevitable that what you call strangeness is not actually strange. Like, you are eventually, the way that the CEO is going to map out encountering strangeness is just going to be according to what fits into their pre-configured notion of what is strangeness, and thus having wit in response to that strangeness. There's not going to be the factor in the system of a truly surprising strangeness, which is found in the response of the other person to something that you've done, and then the surprise of yourself to how you respond to that person. So then there is this necessity of something with community, but then the question is, community for community's sake doesn't necessarily generate surprise, because everyone could agree with one another and there's no anyone showing anything in a performative sense. But then, of course, individualism seems like it could lose the capacity for surprise and strangeness, because you decide what is strange, you decide what is surprising, and that doesn't work. So you need a certain communal structure that allows the possibility of individuals to do something alone, like practicing a dance example or practicing their cooking, that is then presented to the community, that then creates the situation where you have to respond to how they respond to that, and you're surprised by all of that. And it's very interesting. I just keep making and then I'll throw it to you. I keep making the examples of dancing and cooking. One, because I really wish I could try Gurdjieff cooking. And two, how that is so uniquely situated in a community to create this dynamic, or like a community of people coming together to learn how to dance is different from people coming together in a community to talk, you know, just to have community for community's sake. It's interesting how incorporating some kind of skill or practice allows the possibility of unpredictable strangeness and surprise, without which it seems like there's a certain deformity that can result.
Yeah, I love the notion of wit in this, because one of the first ways that Gurdjieff phrased what he was trying to say in Europe was to say, I'm teaching the way of the sly man. Right. And the idea was you could broadly categorize methods of self-development in Asia into three broad categories based on what your skill set is. If you're particularly good with the mind, then maybe you get together with some other yogis and you're going to do concentration or attention control or try to find the root of the eye, right? If you're pretty good emotionally, you get together and you're going to push that skill further, and you're going to be able to just surrender into overwhelming love for God or for your teacher, or, you know, that's got a beautiful, roomy poetry. And if you're good with the body, or you feel like that's what you identify with, then maybe you need to be laying on a bed of nails. Maybe you need your breathing exercises. Maybe you're going to hold still for a week. So these different sets of practices is one way you could taxonomize esoteric work. But Gurdjieff was like, so in addition to all that, there's this other way. The way he called it, the way of the sly man, meaning something that we might characterize Odysseus as having, right? Playful, adaptive, slightly metacognitive, but basically negotiative is how I would phrase it, right? Like you were talking about the children hating the omelet. And the thing that always strikes me about children is their response is their opening bid, right? They're not really stuck with their response. You want to go for a walk? No. Well, that's not the end of the story. That's just the opening bid. So Gurdjieff definitely thinks in that way, advertises that form of thinking as necessary to doing this kind of developmental work that he's proposing. And he critiques people that have been trying to do that too much in isolation, right? My book has an example of this parable of people in the Himalayas mistaking what Buddha was saying. They go, oh, yes, life is suffering and I should suffer to purify myself. And they're locking themselves away in little cages to like really maximize their individual suffering, when the most suffering you could get is from just interacting with other human beings with whom you share tasks and emotions. And that kind of thing really informs a lot of Gurdjieff's thinking in his attempt to build up these communities or temporary field-like structures where people are gathered with a common ethos, and it's not arbitrary. There's a membrane of who's coming into it and who's attracted. There's a wide difference of types of people so that they can get these novel encounters with each other, because if they're all too much the same, right, if they have the same ethics, the same language, the same temperament, they're not going to rub each other in the ways that produce those surprises. So that's important. But they have to be unified in a coherent field that's usually around some kind of practical task that he was very involved in giving people, right? So the unifying thing about the field could be we all kind of agree about the same general project for humanity or ourselves, or it could be something very specific, like we have to build a study hall or something like that. And I think these team building practices, interestingly, act as the constraint that's necessary for a diverse group of people to generate that interpersonal novelty with each other. But that comes down to, and one of the things we haven't touched on very much here is the necessity to constantly be developing discernment about other people. Like when you were talking about that, I thought of a time in high school where I'd been asked to give a performance as part of what they called the rugby talent show at the end of the year. And I'd put no thought into it. And I started to get this reputation in the high school as being a bit peculiar. And more than once, a teacher came up to me and tried to give me this sort of line of ideological bullshit about how, sometimes the strangest thing you can do is to do the ordinary thing. Right. And you're like, you're not wrong. There's something to that, because what we saturate our own evaluations of what normal and abnormal are. That's important, but you could also feel that what they're trying to do is use that argument to get you to just fall back in line. And so you have to be able to discern something about who that person is so you can judge the feedback they're giving you. Gurdjieff had there's a famous little story, and I'm going to mangle it and paraphrase it, but toward the end of his life, he had a cabal of female students who were mostly like artists and lesbians, and he took one to a Parisian strip club, and they're talking, and he goes, which dancer wants you to pick which dancer. And she's like, just because I'm a lesbian doesn't mean I'm in any way attracted to any of these dancers. And he goes, no, if I come here and you are dancing, I pick you. Right? He's trying to teach something about subtle discrimination. That's the kind of person whose feedback could help me figure out what strangeness is appropriate even beyond my own responses. But not everybody's in that category for each of us.
No, I think what you're saying, it also makes me think of that example of the story of the guy saying you shouldn't chew your food before you eat it, and being able to judge is like, that may not be a good idea, but he also is a spiritual master, so maybe there's something to it. That ability to kind of engage in an internal negotiation and then being able to discern. I think, a way I think about it is based on Ivan Illich and different people. We'll talk about a distinction between planning and preparing, where most of education and learning and et cetera, so forth is about making a plan. And it's about planning to avoid the surprise, whereas everything really should be focused on preparation for the surprise. And planning to avoid the surprise or the Lacanian real or the strange or the unknown, that is the technological essence, if you will. That is the logic of modernity, which, again, there's something very inevitable and even good about plans. Like if you're going to go to the grocery store, you have to make a plan. But the problem is there's something about planning that tends to habituate the human out of being prepared. And you can gain a certain fragility if you get overly good at planning. Now, again, using Mr. Ebert's thinking on freak theory, it is precisely now, as technological complexity grows to such a state where it's a black box, we can't know what's going on. It's almost forcing us to rethink what is education. And that may push us into more of, well, being prepared for the unknown, precisely because we can't comprehend everything that the technology is going to do. So what can we comprehend? What can we focus on? Well, we can no longer plan away the unknown, so all we can do is be prepared for the black swans in the unknown, right? And to me, preparation, like philosophy, theology, spirit, like it really should be all about primarily preparation, the ability to be able to handle the surprise and the unknown. And that is fundamentally a wit matter. Like we've overly associated intelligence, if you will, or education with knowing the right answers and having a 5-year plan and a career and knowing what's going to happen. Prediction has been overly emphasized as the role. Like you're intelligent, oh, it's a good model if you can predict what's going to occur. Well, of course, there's something about prediction that is a test. But if it becomes the only way you think about intelligence, then the unpredictable is the nonsensical. And, you know, what we actually just need to do is get better models and better technology and better plans. And then we'll get no. What you need to do is actually there's a certain point where planning will just lead to you're stuck in a Kafka hole, ending up towards something you won't be prepared for, and then you'll be destroyed by it. That's the rub. Like eventually you're going to, eventually in your life, you will encounter something. There's a really good bet that you will encounter something that you will not have planned. And the question will simply be, are you prepared for it or not? If you're not, it could be a Lovecraft creature. If you are, it could be Beatrice and guide you toward, you know, higher up the Paradiso. I think I've referenced it before with you, but there's that wild part in the Paradiso at maybe Canto 29 or 19, where Dante's like, why won't you smile? And Beatrice is like, well, if I were to smile at this part before you climbed higher and developed more, it would reduce you to ash, like Zeus, you know, with some Lee. And the notion is Beatrice literally could turn into a kind of Lovecraft Ancient One if she smiles too early. And I think a lot of the most important things in life are actually like that. Like if you're prepared for this unexpected thing, if you're able to develop to the place to handle Beatrice's smile, well, then it's Beatrice and it's beauty. But if not, it destroys you, right? And so if more and more of humanity's future is going to be defined by these unpredictable things, then really we want to focus on preparation for the unpredictable, and then it could be a Beatrice. But if not, because we're overly trying to plan, then we'll be effaced. We won't be ready for it. And that is a logic of wit and negotiation and discernment, which you have to be able to do live with things that you didn't know were going to occur. And you also have to decide what is the best metaphoric structure by which to think of this, be able to tell, oh, I'm too far into this one way of thinking. Let me switch to a different metaphoric structure. Oh, I've been taking this on through one practice too long. Now I'm at a saturation point and I need to switch it. All of that is in the realm of a very active intelligence, a very one that is able to, on the fly, figure out what needs to be done and to come up with something to put your student, like what you're saying with Gurdjieff, able to come up with an individual particular practice for this particular person that they need, that maybe no one else needs, that then if it's successful will only apply to them. So when we do our quantitative analysis at the end of the year, we'll be like, Gurdjieff, you only helped 2 people. Yeah, but it helped, but that's how it works because you have to particularize it, right? That's what is effective. And it makes sense too, why it has to be particular, because I just keep using this metaphor example because it's the way that I think about it, is one person who's a dancer, they've got that metaphoric structure. They actually need computer science, but this other person has computer science and not dancing, so you've got to switch it. Everyone brings to it, you know, everyone brings to their moment, their now, a different collection of backgrounds and structures and practices that have framed their thinking. So by definition, it has to be particularized. And you've got to be able to figure out, spot the middle term, as Aristotle would say, of what that person needs. And so it has to be particularized. But of course, this flies in the face of a business model or a plan of spiritual development, because you literally can't plan for it before you encounter the person. We've talked a bit about, I call it, you know, encounterology. We really need to focus way more philosophically, spiritually on the raw encounter. And I almost emphasize, you know, obviously this is a relational ontology, but there's something about the encounter that's in the surprise that's almost deeper than the relationship, because we can talk about relationships and not necessarily be talking about encounter and surprise, right? And it's almost like I feel like emphasizing that encounter, that bam, like you could even say kind of the Levinas face, like bam, that moment of the surprise, the moment of the break. That's where so much rests. And then that's what we need to be prepared for, which then, that speaks of a Lacanian real. What is the real but the break, the surprise, right? And what Gurdjieff is suggesting is, yeah, the real's coming. Yeah, you're going to have these breaks, and are you able to handle it or not? If not, it will be Lovecraft. If so, it could be Beatrice, but you have to be prepared for it, and then I'll give it to you. But weirdly, the way to be prepared for it is to do the weird. Oh, well, that's weird. Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's very interesting when you think of things because they do converge in a kind of not literally paradoxical, but kind of a counterintuitive way. If we think of Carl Friston's work on, reducing free energy, or basically surprise mitigation between inner and outer mapping, like, okay, yes, maybe that's the way all these systems are set up. Maybe that's the way cognition unfolds, but how do you actually put yourself into the position to minimize surprise? It's by leaning into the surprising quality so that it's at the processing edge of that whole phenomenon. So we have to take it on like that. We have to do it in the moment of encounter, as you're saying, right? And that encounter can be with objects, with perceptions, with our environments, but primarily for human beings, it's the encounter with other human beings. Meaning, as most of us know, that most of our existential development occurs in our intimate partnerships. But then there's a special subdivision of that, which we call spiritual teachers, which are very interesting things, right? And there's a whole elaborated Gurdjieffian tradition. And what do you do if you meet somebody who says they're a Gurdjieffian teacher? Maybe they're just a complete jackass who says that. Maybe it's somebody and you go, in that moment of initial encounter, there's a certain surprise. You go, oh, there really is something a little bit different about this dude. But then you still have to use your own wit as you go forward, because just because he has that, just because you got that, doesn't mean you're going to get that in every future encounter with him. Doesn't necessarily he doesn't necessarily know what diet you should have or what your relationship practices should be, right? I had a beautiful conversation with internationally famous ex-guru Andrew Cohen a couple of years ago. And one of the things he told me that really stuck with me was when he was functioning in his guru mode, which was, I'm going to give you tasks that you're not really going to want because my job is to help you overcome your ego. He's like, about a third of the time, I have these intuitive senses, and I was right on, and it's what that person needed, and it broke them free in a way they hadn't been able to get out of in years. He's another third of the time, I was right on, but I misjudged how to apply it. I gave slightly wrong instructions, and it worked out worse than if I hadn't given that instruction. And about a third of the time, it was my own asshole, egoic, emotional reactivity and desire to control people, masquerading as a desire to help them overcome their ego by making them do things they didn't want to do, which I could then justify as, well, you need to struggle and suffer to get the surprise quality. So it's complex, and we have to work out collectively and interpersonally how to mutually apply wit in these areas so that you can get the legitimate benefit of the struggle between the sort of egalitarian individualism and the notion of an existential hierarchy without falling into traps on either side of that process. And a lot of that comes down to what I was saying before. How subtle are we at discerning the qualities of other individuals? But also something I want to call, in reference to a previous conversation you and I had, I want to talk about like the assimilation crisis. How good are we at taking things into ourselves so that we have the data on which to make these evaluations? Can we assimilate our remorse? Can we absorb our suffering? Can we digest the novelty of our own perceptions? Can we find out what we value and make that a part of ourselves so that we move forward on that? Right? That's a real unexplored skill set that even if we were to say in a general sense we should fix the education system so it's ready for a more surprising, less predictable future, and that's going to involve people having some intuitive skills and some rational skills and some emotional intelligence, and yeah, they should have a phys ed class. A lot of people could get behind that. But when it comes to how do you from moment to moment more deeply, more accurately, more transformationally assimilate your own experiences and perceptions, especially with other people. We don't really, there's no courses on that. That's not part of our general education system. And it may be that that's the very thing needed in order to put us in a position to be multi adaptive human general intelligences for a world we can't predict.
100%. I'm going to generally call that wit. There are different, like what you're describing. And basically, to just kind of jump ahead, we can decentralize all we want. If we do not develop wit, the decentralization will just fall back on previous historic cycles of decentralization that will be destroyed by an ethical real or a difference on what is right or wrong. It'll be like the American Civil War or other examples, right? Decentralization as an economic or political initiative, which there's a lot of legitimacy to, Michelle Bowens talks about commons at a global scale. I think decentralization has a lot of power, but decentralization without the capacity of wit will fail. Because it will ultimately, it's one thing to talk about, oh, we'll have different communities that do different experiments. It's an entirely another when those communities encounter one another. Let's say, I think we mentioned this exact example. You have one decentralized community that's okay with eating meat and another thinks it's murder. Oh, so is the one who thinks it's murder just going to let them keep murdering over there, or are they going to do something about it, right? Well, crap. How do you integrate with that painful and difficult reality? It's only a matter of time before the ethical wheel shows up. In America, you could say it was slavery. You could go on through history of examples where decentralization is okay until someone is doing something terrible. What if you have one community that's like, well, yeah, they really don't like the other community making deep fakes of people's spouses in pornographic videos. The other group's like, it's not immoral because it's not real. The other one thinks it is. What are they going to do about it? Can they integrate with that difference, or will they have to kill each other, right? These are the incredible challenges that arise with decentralization that you're going to need something like wit and to be able to handle. And because the ethical real, if you give me that phrase, is the surprise, is the encounter that has real stakes, that really feels like it's matter and is going to bring out your emotional reaction and your knee jerks and all that, right? Like people like to dismiss culture, culture war, although it's just a culture war issue. Well, it's not dismissible for the people who care about it. And your culture war is simply saying culture wars are dumb, right? Well, then you go off to that community, but the other community disagrees. Are you going to ignore them? Are you going to be able to work with them, right? Or how do you work with them? What are the terms of working with them? Well, they're evil and eat meat. We better not interact with them at all. Oh, okay. So there are limits to relationships then, right? The ethical. Interesting. So it becomes this problem of the development of these capacities of wit, which I would associate with, is one, incredibly difficult, and two, no project, in my opinion, of decentralization will ultimately work as an address of the current capital nation state dysfunction that we see. The game A, as some people call it, no decentralization or series of game B experimentation or whatever you want to call it will function without the development of wit. It will simply fall back into previous historical. History is a story. I mean, you can look at China. Brandon was mentioning this. China can be seen as a history of decentralization, centralization, decentralization, centralization, going back and forth, over and over again. And it tends to go back and forth and over again when people do something immoral or they take over the other group or someone does something bad. And the ethical real, then you need to centralize to remove ethical differences, but then people feel exploited by the corporate capitalist system, and then the corporations are destroying the environment, so people want to change it, so they switch. But there are other people still eating meat, or people are using AI in ways that you think are problematic, and on and on and on. So this capacity of wit to me is completely necessary. And it's one of the reasons why, I don't want to be an emphasis Nazi. You know how they talk about grammar Nazis? I never liked in college, when people well, you're not emphasizing enough. You're not emphasizing, because you can always make that debate because no one can say everything at once. So I don't want to be an emphasis Nazi, but there is to me a difference between an emphasis on encounter and surprise versus relation. Because relation sounds great. Oh, I like relationships. I like people. They're friendly and they're nice, right? The issue is relationship doesn't necessarily develop wit. Encounter and surprise necessitates wit. And it's precisely, by definition, the unplannable, of which then is the test of preparedness, that if you do not have, you don't have the necessary variable in the system for decentralization to actually work. Or multiplicity that doesn't just lead to fragmentation, right? Wit, well, another way, to me, this notion of integration, because wit to me is fundamentally a skill of integration. It has something about integration with difference. Like, how do you integrate dance and cooking and philosophy? It almost has to require the human being. Dancing does not on its own integrate with philosophy or cooking or religion, right? The integrative variable is the human subject, and the success of that integration will be tied to your nutrition, to your thinking, to your emotional life. The quality of the integration, if you will, is strongly tied to the quality of the human subject and their own spiritual practices, right? And so if you want to, because it sounds to me, if we're talking about pluralism or diversity, and it not be totalized into a singularity, but then it also not be fragmented, seems like the only piece in that is something like integration, ergo wit, right? Then the question becomes the following. Okay, how do you develop wit? Seems to be surprise, which is requirement of relationship at a certain level, but it is not simply relationship, right? It's a certain quality. It is the encounter, right? But this is where things like discernment are so big, because if you give people too much encounter too quickly, they're overwhelmed and destroyed. And also, if they don't have the right skills, you're setting up to fail. There's an entire art of encounter. And to me, when you were speaking of the guru, like a good guru is someone who is thinking in terms of surprise and encounter and discerning one's capacity to gain the ability to have quote unquote wit, right? To me, like one of the problems of why we've, I think, culturally dismissed the category of guru is because we metaphorically associate precisely the problem we've talked about. We only have the metaphor of the technocrat to think of the guru. So we think of he has the right answers or not. And if he's wrong, he's bad. And we throw him out, right? When really, in the same way, we would not say someone is a bad engineer if when they look at a bridge, they make a bad decision or they make a bad thing, right? There'd be consequences, but we wouldn't say that engineering therefore does not exist, right? The issue is that, a kind of way I was thinking about it is the guru is a kind of discernist. They're a kind of someone skilled in a particular practice of discernment, and they're engaged in a kind of discernist, if we speak that generally, not to reduce it to that, but they really, or a wittist, maybe we'll call them a wittist, where they're really like skilled in that discernment capacity, which is particular, but is not going to be right all the time. But that's not evidence that the person doesn't have a real skill there. It's that it's a real skill, and skills sometimes get it wrong in the same way that you can be skilled at gardening and still kill your squash plants. That doesn't mean the skill doesn't exist or is fake or gardening doesn't exist. It means that you're dealing with live variables that have surprising results that are irreducible and unpredictable, and you just got to work on the discernment. And to me, thinking about it as a certain discernist capacity makes a lot of sense if we emphasize encounter, surprise, and wit, which is tied to an integrative intelligence. And then something like, I guess the other phrase people use is sense making or something. That means a lot of things to a lot of people. And I'll pass it back to you. But this capacity of discernment, of discernist, which has a certain cultivation of wit and integration, is absolutely a utterly necessary capacity for any projects of decentralization to have any chance of working without just falling back into historic patterns of working until an ethical real happens. And once that ethical real happens, then people go to war, kill each other. You then get centralization. Then you're exploited financially, on and on and on and on. So to me, this capacity is completely this negotiational capacity, this wit capacity, this integrative capacity is non-optional. It is completely necessary, but it's really hard to think because it's counterintuitive to the background metaphoric structures by which we associate what is a good use of time, what is good thinking, what is knowledge, et cetera, so forth. So we have to overcome that, and overcoming that is tied to various practices.
Yeah, one of the interesting things in the Gurdjieffian approach is the emphasis on the subconscious and this notion that you have a capacity for the ethical real. You have conscience, right? But the conscience is essentially existing in a subconscious part of your psyche that's undercultivated. It's been replaced by your conscious mind's oversaturated, socially coded information. And that includes the generally shared knowledge of what is good. right? So you may have to disrupt all of that in order to provoke growth in the submerged conscience functions of the individual. And so you do that by increased energy flow and also by uncovering the like pluralistic or decentralized infrastructure of how that thing works. But it's not purely deconstructed and decentralized, it's an integrative machinery of some kind. Right, and the move collectively toward a more distributed and decentralized type of techno-social existence, which has a lot of arguments in favor of it, and is probably the inevitable outcome of the way that digital tools sculpt our minds, has to be met by a similar move within the individual. The individual has to be experienced as a cooperatively decentralized, right, a plural but coherent entity, so that it can work with the coherent but plural entity of the human collective and the technological collective. And if you don't have both of those, we're going to have really despiritualizing and dehumanizing kinds of outcomes. So it's essential to have human beings of this type for the type of world that's emerging. And a lot of the way you get that done is through relational intensifications. You're calling it encounter. Gurdjieff has this, or at least the Beelzebub character in Beelzebub's Tales, constantly references our inner evil god self-calming. Right. And so there's a function we have. We go, well, I just want to be able to get by. I want to fit into my everything. I want to have relationships that strike me as equitable and harmonious. And if any of intensity increases occur in my self encounter or my encounter with the other, then something's gone wrong and I should escape or demonize or forget about it. And what Gurdjieff is saying is, no, it's precisely in the increased sense of activation in the self-encounter or the other encounter that you begin to have all of that machinery put back into play so that it can be stimulated, it can unfold, and so that this capacity you're calling wit can begin to emerge in a way that makes us be the potentially indigenous inhabitants of the world that's coming.
No, I mean, that's brilliant. Well, and again, wit requires a high level of energy. Energy, and this is where you can see, I've heard it said, that consciousness, which of course is an extremely loaded term, but consciousness is not merely in the brain, it's the whole body, right? With beingness and different things, right? This is where energy, nutrition, and getting energy and inspiration from nutritious experience, there's all these different forms of energy. Energy and the capacity to handle difference are strongly tied together. Because why do people, as they generally get older, retreat from pluralism and tend to generally become more conservative? Not that conservative is bad, but they just generally tend to go in that direction. Because they have less energy, they have less time energy, as Dave McCarricker might say. And so that naturally leads you into a direction of de-emphasizing wit and encounter, and in fact, planning your life in such a way to have more consistency, more regularity, right? One's philosophical willingness to deal with the existential is tied to maybe how much kale you eat. And it would seem silly to suggest that there's some relationship with one's capacity to handle the face in Levinas and eating kale and exercise. But actually, these things are tied together because it is exhausting. There is a huge energy demand that is put on you to actually go into the encounter space, to go through it. Focus requires energy. There's a lot of, people don't have attention. They don't have focus, right? Well, bad nutrition, no exercise, no practice, plus dopamine, yeah, that's going to be a problem, right? So again, I mean, everyone, there's pretty basic studies that show exercise helps you think. Like, it can make you smarter. That's a big deal. If you really take that seriously, that's kind of a big deal. People talk about changing their diet, changing their brain fog. They have less brain fog. That's crazy. It's almost like the body all works together for your entire experiential apparatus. And so the apparatus, in it, the probability of a given human as a whole being able to successfully work through integration mechanisms, of which if we do not do, decentralization will not work, and pluralism, who knows what will occur, is tied to this full body way of thinking. And again, that is not given to you necessarily by various metaphoric constructions or background structures that you tend to get from maybe the church or the college or so on and so forth. The other thing I was thinking about is the reason why, like, that kind of self-comfort can be so problematic, not training to handle strangeness, is because we really don't appreciate, and this makes me think of Leibniz, we really don't appreciate how much we are, in fact, set up to encounter some sort of surprise. And it's like Leibniz, based on the work of the great Anthony Morley on his analysis of Citas. And this is another reason why I like to think of the encounter and the surprise as a little bit deeper, if you will, or more refined, I suppose, than just a general relationship, is because what Leibniz points out is he says that two things are similar are that of which when you bring, the only way to know how they're different is to bring them together. If they were the same, then there would only be one. Like two things can't actually be the same, right? If they're similar, that means you think they're not different. So he makes the example of a temple. And imagine you were in a temple that geometrically was exactly the same as another temple on the other side of the planet. Something as similar is when you go in one temple and you look around, you would think you were in the other temple. That's what they are similar. And his point is the only way to actually know that they're separate is to bring them into a situation. Ergo, you get in a plane and fly. Therefore, there's a geometric situation that unveils to you they're located differently in space-time, or time-space, however you want to word it, geometry. Or you mentally bring the two memories together to see, or you somehow transport the temples together. But here's the funny thing. Similarity, then, is precisely always a revelation of difference. That's the joke. And yet the whole reason you bring similar things together is because you think they're not different. And this is why every relationship has the seeds of its own disruption. Because the whole reason you got married to the person is because they were similar or similar enough or compatible. Something that is similar is that which you can only know its difference by bringing it into relationship. So the key function of relationship is the unveiling of difference. And yet the whole reason you established the relationship is on the grounds of similarity. So there's always a kind of joke. There's always something kind of funny going on, right? And wit entails an awareness that, hey, we're similar, so let's get together to figure out how we're different. Because for Leibniz, for Leibniz, similar things are that of which difference you cannot know apart. The only way to know how they're different is to bring them together. So for Leibniz, the whole point of relationship is surprise. The whole point of bringing things together is encounter. And I cannot, and yet, very often we think about, I think, generally relationships and communities and all that as precisely we're not different. That's why we're together. So you train different faculties. You train different, you do different organizational, like, oh, we're all Christian, so let's get everyone together and then make sure we never say anything that rocks the boat. Similarity has to be then simulated, right? And then it has to be enforced totalitarian. This is what ends up happening. You inevitably get a power structure, right? Well, if similarity is actually to have the proper role that for Leibniz it's supposed to have, it is a revelation of difference. Well, then here's the question. How do you handle difference? Wit. So without wit, you're not going to be able to handle difference. So every similarity will only be maintained via some sort of totalization structure. That's not integration. That's the opposite of integration. And so not even communities that think they are similar can ultimately hold together without totalization unless they have wit, let alone communities that think they're different, right? Now, of course, one of the reverse jokes of this is difference are things that you don't know are similar, but the only way you're able to tell that they're different is that they're similar enough that they're intelligible to you. That's the other flip that Leibniz throws at you, right? So difference is an invitation to discover a similarity you didn't know was there. And that's how you can have an integrative logic here, right? You need the difference to encounter the similarity that you didn't know existed, as you need the similarity to encounter the difference that you couldn't have encountered apart. And that kind of brings a certain, that destroys comfort. That obliterates comfort. Relationship is and this is where we talk about belonging. This means belonging, again, is not a matter of a kind of spiritual comfort, but in fact, a comfort in discomfort, a belonging in a disruption. How do you belong in disruption and it not be deconstructive? Wit. It has to be a human freaking capacity. Like, it has to be a capacity. Anything sort of a capacity is going to fall either on the side of fragmentation or totalizing. So there's some sort of capacity that has to be brought in that is a certain wit that is able to handle the surprise of difference that only arises because you brought the similar together to find out how they're not the same. And that sort of comedy is, I think, when Gurdjieff, like this idea of this kind of devil of comfort, like that devil is a devil precisely in that it keeps you from discovering the difference. Therefore, you have no capacity to make a difference of yourself or to become different or to move into greater capacities because you never encountered the difference to know what you might be able to move into. So what you were saying on Gurdjieff makes me think of Leibniz there, but let me throw it back to you.
First of all, I like you. That was a great rant.
I like you.
Yeah, in my whole metaphysics of adjacency kind of thinking,
Yes.
it's one of those things where you have to have a concept like same difference. Like sameness and difference aren't technically thinkable
Yep.
as alternatives to each other. And you see this a lot. You see it in people like Leibniz, but you also see it really clearly in practicing aspects of the Zen tradition. Right? It's one of my favorite koans is visitor comes to the temple and the master takes him down to watch some people meditating, and these two guys, they meditate exactly the same. They get up, they roll up their mat, they tidy up, they leave. They're exactly the same. And the master says to the visitor, one of them has it, one of them doesn't. Right? Because it confronts you with this unbearable overlap between sameness and difference. And that's at the root of most of the koanic structures. And that can inflict upon you an altered state of consciousness where you like oversaturate your ability to tell the difference between sameness and difference.
Yes.
And when you're in that mode, it's super functional, and you're like, okay, there's something about the ontology of the real that makes this mode possible, right? It's actually not possible in reality for sameness and difference to be different. And now that I know that experientially, maybe we can start to unpack that into a dharma of living that takes that into account, because once you see it, you realize that all of the emergent evolutionary structures in the world and in our cognition set us up for that fact. And if we constantly think that sameness and difference are alternatives to each other, we're not going to be able to work with that very well.
Yep.
And for me, it comes back in the Gurdjieffian teaching. You know, he has this weird phrase for his teaching. A lot of people come down through the Ouspensky phrase and call it the fourth way. But he says, I'm talking about being parts Cadell, which is another one of his fabulous. You can etymologically deconstruct that, but he's also making a strange term for you. And it's got two parts. One is intentional labor, conscious labor and intentional suffering. Conscious is a dubious word for a guy who says the subconscious is the real consciousness, but nonetheless, intentional suffering and conscious labor, right? Practices you're doing with consciousness to get better at discerning difference and your lived ability to tolerate the intensities of difference. Those are the two root skills out of which the Gurdjieffian Dharma emerge.
No, that's brilliant. And for me, the key also, like when thinking of the metaphysics of adjacency, that 1%, the 1% has to kind of be surprising. That because otherwise there would be 100%. It has to be, you don't know where the 1% is going to show up, right? Likewise, what's so critical with this notion of difference, it has to be surprising. But it can only emerge in the situation in which then it's live. It's always go time. Difference is always go time. And so if you're talking about pluralism and it's really pluralism, it has to be that which can't show up in any other space but live, right? Like the 99% is there for the to see what you do with the 1% per se. Like how are you going to, the whole point of the 9% is the 1%. You know, a way I was speaking with Matthew Allison about it is, obviously in various Western religions, there's a notion of the miracle and there's the idea of the natural law. Like the point of natural law is not that the natural law is more real. It's actually the miracle per se. But you couldn't have a miracle be meaningfully such if there wasn't consistency. Like consistency is why surprise is possible. You have to have consistency or else there can't be surprise, right? It would just be chaos. So surprise requires consistency. But the funny thing is it's the surprise in a sense that is more meaningful, more real, more substantive than the consistency. The consistency is simply the prerequisite for the miracle or the surprise or so on and so forth. Likewise, the similarity is the necessary difference so that is the necessary precondition so that a difference can emerge and be a difference, but it has to be surprising. And it has to be one of one as well. because the difference between A and B is always going to be different from the difference between B and C that can only be known in the situation, ergo the relationship where they're brought together thinking there is no difference. So there's always a kind of alchemy going on, right? There's always a kind of magic that emerges. That then the question is it Beatrice or Lovecraft? And if you don't have wit, the difference is probably going to be Lovecraft. If it is, it could be Beatrice. But the question is, are you ready? And I think like that 1%, like here it is. Are you ready? Okay. This is the way. But you needed the consistency for the surprise, which then makes it easier to, it makes it easy to think that the consistency is the most important when actually it's the surprise. And thinking things like decentralization, pluralism, global community, however you want to language it, none of that is something that we can properly think if we over-index consistency, similarity, regularity, as opposed to simply seeing those as the necessary stage for the surprise, for the difference, for the 1%. And if that's the case, and reality is such, well, then that becomes a justified basis for practicing wit and preparation over planning and just kind of a technical knowledge, because technical knowledge is about the extension of consistency. How do we get AI to extend the consistency, to make sure there are no unpredictable things, right? And the great joke is that it's precisely in this technology that is supposed to make everything consistent that it's a giant black box that we don't know what's going to do. That's the great joke. There's a kind of grace in that, right? That not even AI could help in its effort to make everything knowable in of itself be unknowable, thus function as a revelation of our need to maybe move in the direction of preparation versus planning. It's lovely that way, kind of an Ebert freak theory in total saturation. But then again, the other thing about all that is that thing goes back, like looking, you know, as Joachim was saying, this goes back to like when you look at Aristotle's virtue ethics, like ethics is tied to the surprise, the wit, the humility, the encounter, the leveness, you know, the face in like Levinas even, as Dave has been teaching on, and I'm no expert on him, but the face in Levinas is really that, it's the face, the encounter, the boom, there it is. It's the Ivan Illich man on the side of the road. Reality is no, the funny thing is that what Leibniz is saying is that reality as a whole is no different than the man on the side of the road. It is a metageometrical entity. That's difference must always be a surprise. And the only way to know the truth is to know the surprise. And the only way to know the surprise is if there's a consistency that then seems like the truth as the consistency, but actually that's a mistake. The consistency is the stage for the surprise that is the real. And then, of course, someone like Joachim will say, like, that for Plato gets tied to the beautiful. The beautiful is the difference. The beautiful is the thing that comes out. But the key, I do think, is understanding that the beautiful can kill, the beautiful can destroy you. All of the most real things are doubled, right? The very thing that is wonderful is also the thing that's horrible if misordered. Like love. Like when you love someone, that means they can destroy you. Like a stranger can't really destroy you. I mean, they can shoot you, but they can't devastate you emotionally, right? Because you don't give a darn. It's when you care about someone that they can destroy you. Interesting. Beauty has a way of like piercing you and also making you feel inadequate or destroying you or you're overwhelmed or whatever. It can make you envious. It can have all these negative responses, right? Like the most real and important things, and I do think it's tied to the question of meaning, because meaning, if we use that as a general term for Vakian, in overcoming bad nihilism and all that, bad nihilism, it depends on what we mean, all of that is tied to a preparation for the experience of the thing of which, if you're unprepared for, destroys you. Oh, frick. And that's a more refined, for me, that's a way to think about when we talk about practices or rituals or beliefs. Are these things making you prepared for the encounter of the thing that must surprise you when it happens, that if you're not ready for, destroy you? If yes, you should do it. If no, you shouldn't do it. Oh, and by the way, there's not a single practice. So if you're only doing one thing forever, it's wrong. So you need to be switching, right? And that kind of frames it. And when you really get that and then I'll give it to you, that there's this thing in you that wants comfort. It wants consistency. I mean, it makes sense because if 99% of reality is consistent, it would make sense that you in part of reality and nature as a continuum of that process would fall for the same way. But you really, really need to develop the muscle of that 1% that is able to go, no, No, we're going to work that consistency to be an anti-fragile system, right? I mean, it's just like they say in systems logic. You really want to make sure you have dissonance in your system or else it's fragile, right? If everyone agrees, you're fragile, right? Well, you as an individual have to make sure there's a dissonant in yourself. And that's really hard. But if you don't have that dissonant in yourself, which you have to train, because you're always then manipulating yourself to convince yourself that you're a dissonant when you're not, and you're back in the consistency, and you always have to be doing that reflexivity to make sure there's still a dissonant. If you do not do that, you will not be prepared for the surprise and the difference, of which, if you're not prepared for, it will destroy you. And so you just blow that up to the entire logic of pluralism. Pluralism and decentralization will not work if people are not prepared for the difference that can only emerge in the similarity that they don't know is there, that they have to be prepared for. If they're not prepared for that, not going to work. And that's it's just gonna fall back into the cycles of history, which then gets into the development of this wit, as we put it.
Yeah, there's a whole educational structure, whole ethos that's necessary in order to prepare people to live in the kind of world that's being proposed as the only viable alternative to modernity's slowly but impressively self-destructed momentum. Gurdjieff has these phrases like every stick has two ends, right? And so you need, that's an example of a kind of imagistic and aphoristic mimetic chunk. He plays with these a lot, but I think in this kind of ethos of training, you need people to have a lot of different kinds of evocative and thematically diverse examples of things to think about, so that we collectively build up a knowledge set that says you can't tease those things apart. You've got to be prepared for their interaction, and that's coming, and you prepare for it by dealing with the interaction now as a preparation, and you deal with that partly by going through it and partly by building a thought system that has that interactivity at its very core. And it's nested in a stacked layered universe. It's also stacked and layered. Now, one of the interesting things about early Gurdjieffian teaching, and you never know how much he believes it or whether he's just responding to the cosmological needs of Russian theosophists in 1916, but he unfolds for a while this notion of these layers of laws, right, between us and the absolute. And the relationship between the layers is where we get the phenomenon that we perceive as miraculous, right? So you've got a consistency of the laws we know about. Then there's another realm that actually obeys a smaller number of more complex laws. And when those laws burst through into ours, that relationship is the one we perceive as miraculous. But it requires the surprise and the continuity. It's a relationship to the continuity that we're used to.
Yes.
And this notion of surprise and disruption as A, the inherent nature of the universe, and B, the inherent nature of the training we have to produce as a culture in order to be prepared for reality, is all the way through him. So if you read things like Beelzebub's Tales, one of his 3 or arguably 4 books, the Earth is hit by a comet. That's where the whole thing starts off. There's an unexpected collision that was not foreseen by the cosmic intelligences, right? The angels were caught with their pants down. None of the omniscient intelligences were able to handle this. A collision occurred nonetheless, and everything that happened was trying to deal with that after the fact. So it's built into the cosmological mythology of this character, and he even tells this, to me, lovely story about how God creates the universe, but he hasn't really reckoned with like entropy. Yes, and so everything slowly gets worse, even though it's perfect. And he has to create a whole new universe where everything like collaboratively enfolds entropy and shocks and regenerates perfection so that it doesn't constantly break down. Right? And that's true as we learn about the nature of reality, but it's also true as a parable about how we have to go about constructing the Dharma for a new educational culture to live in the world as we understand it now, because we have to be building in these anti-fragility mechanisms. Unless we're using failure, unless we're using collision, unless we're using shock, unless we're using the like you were talking about, the what's murder, the intervalue tensions that exist between different decentralized communities, we have to fold all of that into the production of the new coherence. And if we're not prepared to do that by an ongoing safe and challenging education in this process, then we're not going to get anywhere. And I want to emphasize that safe part because it has to be done wisely. You can't just go, okay, the nature of reality is encounter and collision, so I'm going to start violating everybody's consistencies
Yeah.
and inflicting collisions on them as if I was some kind of benevolent being. They can only handle as much as they can handle. They need to recoup, and it's only appropriate for them under certain conditions. So we have to develop a background, compassion driven, very well informed, diversity oriented wisdom about how to prepare people to be part of this culture that we're trying to generate, because it's the culture that not only is unfolding from the technologies we have, but it's the one that represents our best emergent understanding of what reality is actually like. It's not a steady state phenomenon where you can just learn the correct facts and move on. It's going to constantly thwart you. And that thwart is the engine of understanding. Are we good at being thwarted? No, we're terrible at it. How can we get better to the degree that we can get better?
No, that's fantastic. And well, for me, that suggests, why I think there's like the psychoanalytical project, obviously Cadell's work on like the Nietzsche and Hegel and Lacan, this kind of emphasis on the negativity, tearing with the negativity. That sounds nihilistic, but actually it's precisely the training with discomfort and the preparation for the real that is a necessary work to be able to move into the space of dare I say, a pluralism that doesn't just eat itself or just fall back into the cycles of history. But you have to face a certain negativity, and you have to develop a very, very deep kind of self-skepticism of your own capacity, of your own idea of your capacity for the real, right? And I think, there's a few things. First, what you were saying on like the danger, right? Like one of the problems is people don't think of education as dangerous. It's boring, right? Well, but what if the teacher came in and said, hey guys, we're going to be learning about physics, and did you know like there's like all of this backstabbing, conspiratorial work at IBM to control, like people are like, what? The physics? Oh yeah, man. And did you know there's like maybe a silencing effort on anything outside of string theory going on? What? Yeah, there are real stakes, and this could lead to the military. Like, there's not a sense that education is dangerous, right? It's like, oh, we're going to be talking about like ethical theories. Oh, by the way, people have died over this stuff, and laws are written by this, right? Like, if you learn too much too quickly, there are real stakes. Well, the students might sit up in the chair and go, okay. There's something about also, it's kind of funny. Danger can create meaning. Danger is a great way to create meaning because you're aware, you're focused, you're engaged, and if you don't die, success, meaning. There's a certain feeling of virtue in it, right? So bringing a sense, like that's what you see in a lot of these, mystical traditions. Oh, God's showing up? Don't look at his face. He'll freaking kill you, man. Again, just as you look at some of these mystical traditions, we talked about weirdness. They're just floating. There's just like little devils here. It's really weird. Like, it's not like the beautiful and the weird and the holy are all mixed together. That's important. And then there's a sense of danger. Oh, you touched the Ark of the Covenant? Sorry, you're dead. I touched it. Yeah, well, you're dead. Sorry. That danger actually is a thing, like education suffers when it's separated from danger. Like it becomes boring, it becomes technical. Well, I mean, the technological essence, Standing Reserve, all the Heideggerian stuff, Illu, it doesn't, all of these people, like education is about avoiding danger. It's about planning away danger. So it's boring as heck, and let's let the computer do it. Okay. And if humans exist to avoid danger, then AI will replace humans because they have no function. But if humans exist to make sure that the danger is still in the system, that the AI, it can't bring into the system, then to the whole ecosystem, the human has a really important role. So I often think about how the lack of a sense of the danger in education. And then, of course, if the teacher, if the teacher is teaching you something that if they screw up kills you, that creates a certain respect. And also kills them as well. That creates a different relationship with the teacher. Like, oh, they've gone into the depths. Going into the depths and being certified are different. You can be certified and never go into the depths, but a real teacher, we're like, oh, they're going to teach me to go into the depths because they've been into the depths, if you will. They've encountered the surprise. They've gone and found that thing that could be a Lovecraft, right? That creates a very different relationship to the teacher versus, oh, they're certified, they know math, I got to know math to get a job, I guess I got to do it, but I really don't want to, right? The danger of education today is falling out of capitalism or getting a bad job, right? Well, that's not a spiritual danger. That feels like a threat. Threat and danger are not the same. Threat is like a big other. Threat is where the system's like, if you don't listen to my rules, you're going to die. Danger that has this meaningful sense is reality is a surprise. It's dangerous, and it could show up anytime. Well, that creates an adventure. Danger and adventure are tied together. That creates I better work at it. I better be prepared. Whereas threat creates complacency, a bad form of assimilation, thoughtlessness, and so on and so forth. But again, that's just an example. Like, what's the difference between threat and danger? Seems like the same. That right there is a discernment matter. Can you discern that difference? The only way to tell the difference is to bring them together, and they're similar. So you bring them together in a conversation, a mental situation, as Leibniz would say, so that the difference can come out. And discerning that difference and remembering that difference is then in of itself a necessary practice so that you don't fall into one of those Kafka hallways, right? But there's a massive difference. But if you never thought it, if you've never brought them together, you've used the word simile, you've used the words as similes, but in different situations, you never think them together, difference never emerges, therefore there's no development that can occur, and that you can then integrate into your mental apparatus to see that difference. A few more things. I think, basically you could, obviously there's the process event, that language that Bard will use. You've had events, but no process. You've had process and no events. The issue is that the event, as the surprise, is something that requires the capacities of wit and preparation to handle its occurrence, right? The thing that surprises. And really, to me too, so we need that. And the other thing I was going to say, there almost seems to be almost a kind of at least a collective subconscious awareness of some sort of new education that is needed. You see the growth of therapy. You see the growth of liminal web spaces, the growth of communal urges, this kind of idea that college has left something behind, the need for more conversation. There's this kind of collective movement of a sense that something is not being taught or practiced that needs to be practiced. The issue is right now, I don't think it's focused on the surprise. It's not focused on the difference. And so it tends to go in the direction of just how to be a good employee in the corporate structure, or how to stop the other guy from winning the election. And what you're doing is just talking, you're forming community for political power. But if instead we say, well, no, all of this kind of sense of a need for better teaching is actually the development of wit, if you will. That's what's kind of ultimately needed, precisely to handle difference and surprise, that if you can't handle, you get destroyed. But I do have some hope in the sense that there almost seems to be a collective movement of the zeitgeist to some degree in this notion of something like wit. And then, the other thing I think is that basically, if there's something about, like, as we're saying, pluralism, decentralization, none of these things work with wit. Wit is tied to the ability to have friendship as a philosophical culture. Like, friendship is a kind of integration, is a kind of difference, integration with difference. You have Nietzsche talk about it, Cicero. Alan Bloom says something very odd at the end of the Closing the American Life that always caught my attention, where he's like, without the humanities, friendship is impossible. What are you talking about? I think what he was getting at is, one, you can notice that the humanities, philosophy, etc., allow these kind of extensive conversations that are not small talk. That seems important. The other thing that I think he was getting at is almost Gurdjieffian, in the sense of friendship is impossible if you end up stuck in a certain metaphoric track or a certain one way of thinking. You're not going to be able to maintain the friendship, because inevitably you're going to operate according to a logic that alienates the other, or that leads to a difference emerging that you cannot handle. So the friendship will break. I mean, if there is indeed some sort of friend session going on, as lost connections talk about, that to me is a product of a loss of wit. It's not merely a loss. It's not simply screens. They've almost become a scapegoat now. It's always the screens. And don't get me wrong, the screens have effed a lot of things up. But the screens don't have to. It's a matter of wit, right? Like, the screens only destroy you if you're not prepared for the surprise of the dopamine rush that the frickin' screen gives you. I mean, it's very powerful. But I think a lot of the lost connections, isolationism too, is tied to the people don't have the wit to handle difference. And so then they isolate because it's too mental, and they don't have the energy. by which to go out and form community either, let alone community that's going to entail an emergence of a difference they're not ready for. That's what you keep, I think you keep seeing people coming together because they're similar, difference emerges they're not prepared for, then they give up. They don't do it anymore. And in fact, when I go to the screen, the algorithm curates an experience that never makes me face a frickin' difference, because it's always a stream. It's never a community, it's just a stream. So I never encounter a difference that I have to deal with or try to curate away. So, wit, friendship, pluralism, decentralization, these things have to go together. And there's something about, like you're saying, a different cultivation of a teaching that is necessary, that is more focused on the surprise, the encounter, the wit to handle it. And if we do not do this, you can make all the political projects you like. You can decentralize finance all you like. You can create all the whatever you like, but it will simply fall back into the various cycles of history. But let me throw it to you. And I know we're coming up on the end. I don't know where the time goes, but I always enjoy speaking with you dearly.
Yeah, I like your idea of danger as a kind of one of the state opportunities, opportunities for an inner state that allows us to become real students, which is also what the word disciple means, to be a learner of some kind, right? And then it's complex, and like everything else, we would saying it's attuned to individuals, because too much danger overloads someone. They need more care and support, and it's a delicate dance. But there is something about danger as a signal that the education you're receiving comes from expertise in depth.
Yep.
And if you're not getting that, as we currently are not getting, there will be a tendency to seek depth in other places that may be a more reckless form of depth. And my hunch is we're coming up on a new age of cultism that's going to make the early 70s look like nothing, right? Because if you combine massive dissatisfaction with education, massive friend session, right? Just a feeling of interpersonal insufficiency in communal living, massive distrust with our institutions, an AI culture where you can just ask the device to generate a theology, to generate persuasion, and the most amazing diversity of psychedelic options that have ever existed and are being generated in a novel fashion day by day. At some point, that converges into a possibility for an enormous culture of new cultism. Now, on the other side of that culture is a huge civilization reinvigoration. Fantastic. But in order to survive our way through it, we have to have sensible alternatives to seeking recklessly in that jungle, which means we have to have a real educational system that has multidimensionality, has real relationship, has real encounter, has altered states, and has that element of danger that signals the depths. And my sense is, and I guess the reason I wrote this book is, I think Gurdjieff has something. Gurdjieff, when you take him in a certain way, right? Like my Gurdjieff is not the same as everyone else's Gurdjieff, and right, everybody's emphasizing and de-emphasizing certain aspects. But the one I'm looking at provides a kind of primitive framework for an existential development approach and a new educational ethos that might serve the metamodern and meta-crisis era, and this need for wit production that you're pointing to, this negative capability problem we've been looking at, and the generation of essentially the inner capacities that go along with the ability to be viable participants in a new collective intelligence system, a new techno-social system. And basically, how do we get enough HGI to live in a world of AGI, right? It seems to me that this is one of the few deeply spiritual thinkers who has something to tell us about how we do that.
No, I think you're exactly right, and I think the book lays that out very clearly, elegantly, and brilliantly. So I think it's very important. I think, for me, a way to put it very generally, because I keep using the Lovecraft example, but I find it useful. If we think of Lovecraft with the craft in parentheses, to live is to deal with a Lovecraft where it's in parentheses, and the question is, how do we relate to it? Are we prepared for it? If we're prepared for it, it's love in a Beatrice sense. Maybe you could say I've also written it Lovecraft with a hyphen, or Lovecraft without a hyphen. Have you learned the craft of love, basically? Friendship, relationship, wit. The issue is that the only way you cannot You cannot have meaning or deal with nihilism or any of the stuff that makes you most human unless you're dealing with a love craft, with the craft in parentheses. And the choice is up to you. Like, are you prepared or not? Have you engaged the practices or not? But the problem is the choice is up to you, and you don't know what you should choose or what you should do. So you need others, right? Well, then there's this weird paradox where the other is precisely the one that makes the lovecraft emerge that you need in order to learn how to be prepared for the lovecraft, right? And that then means something like guides, something like teachers, something like communities, or certain abilities to engage with the other that allows an exploration to figure out the crevices and character of this Lovecraft in parentheses, so you can get better at it. There is something about philosophical speech that has that ability in its indirectness, in its ability to talk about emotions, not just through emotions. It can take a meta layer to reflect on what's happening, not just be in what's happening. It allows a certain orbiting structure, as maybe a Sindler or a DC Sindler or a Vervaeke would structure dialogue. There are certain ways the philosophical dialogue allows a movement toward getting better and better at approaching the Lovecraft, so you can take it more and more on at various intensities, at various relationships that you then move as you read a certain point. Oh, I know everything. I know these people. Well, that's when you need to maybe get new relationships. Not necessarily abandon the old, but start expanding. Okay, you've got the depth. It's almost like I always think about the difference between distance and depth. If you have a lot of distance but no depth, it's shallow. If you have a lot of depth but no distance, you haven't gone anywhere, right? So you have to somehow get both. It's almost like you need distance and you find depth. Up, I'm hitting rock, let's go this way, distance, hitting rock, let's go. And there's this kind of sensing that out. And I think Gurdjieff is pointing toward, hey, the feelings that you tend to associate with you need to keep going are actually meaning you need to move in the direction of distance because now you're too comfortable or you're not feeling enough suffering. Suffering is an indication that you need to change your orientation. Like if you're really focused on distance right now and there's no suffering, you need to switch to depth. If you're doing a lot of depth, but you've gotten comfortable with depth, well, you need to switch to distance. Whatever is going to cause you suffering, of which you engage at the suffering precisely at the point of comfort and not before, right? Like otherwise it would be arbitrary. It's when you get to that point of the depth then becomes too easy, too simple, and so on and so forth. And the reason you do that, though, is precisely for being able to live with and handle greater and greater relations encounter with the Lovecraft. With the craft in parentheses. And I think if we think about education as and training as working for a development with the Lovecraft, well, then you change your freaking school set. We've talked about it before. The classroom is structured to make you good at trivia, right? Well, that's not going to make you good with dealing with a Schrodinger's cat-like entity that's both Lovecraft and love with the craft in parentheses, right? That's a matter of orientation. It makes me think it would be a different subject, but I love bringing up different subjects at the last minute. In military strategy, there's this one guy, his name's John Boyd, and he talks about Udo, which is observe, orientate, decide, and act. And he says the one that's the hardest is orientate, because it's easy to observe, but it's difficult to orientate yourself relative to what you observe and then to decide and act. Orientation would be like this ability to move between frames, to move between different practices, to see, okay, the world is X way, I am X way, therefore I need Y way. We don't tend to do that. We don't tend to orient very much, right? Well, if you're dealing with a Lovecraft, your ability to handle it and relate to it in the proper way is a matter of orientation. How you orient to it relative to your spiritual practices, of which is tied to your nutrition level, your physical capacity, your mental skills. The limits of your capacity of experience are tied to your body and so on, are the very ones that are the limits of your orientational capacity. Well, you would change your school. If you really took that seriously, you would teach different. You would have a different classroom. You would have a different college structure. You would have different associations of what it means to be an educated person, right? You wouldn't have people's knee-jerk association of answer is to pull out your phone. That's now just trained into us. That's our habitus. Like, get your phone and look it up. Search Google. Ask ChatGPT. That is a society that associates education with getting answers, as opposed to conditioning yourself and training yourself for the surprise and encounter of the Lovecraftian, so that you can have the meaning, so that you can have the friendship, so that you can have greater levels of diversity and not be destroyed by it. So all of that has to be those associational apparatuses have to be shifted. And I think you've made a compelling case for why Gurdjieff is very important for that move. And then I will pass it to you for final thoughts on anything at all, including why deep fry might be the ultimate Gurdjieffian topic, because deep frying, suffering, and cooking, and so on and so forth, all go together. But Mr. Layman Pascal.
Well, certainly if one tried to imagine what Gurdjieff would be doing today, he might be hosting a reality cooking show of some kind of cross between MasterChef and Survivor. And I would love the idea, like I can imagine at the bottom of my book, it just says, because Lovecraft.
Banned on Mars because Lovecraft.
The notion of the phone, though, is intriguing. You know, when I have this image in my mind, very simplistic image of person sees a flower and then they have this feeling and they go, oh, something else, something more is needed here, maybe another mode of engagement, and they reach for this device and they take a picture. And in that amount of time, they could have touched it, smelled it, made an additional internal intentional effort. They could have done something else because they had the feeling, and the feeling is already indicating to them to pass through a certain kind of experiential intensity in order to gain a deeper, more personal appreciation of what's going on here. In order to get access to the value you've just detected, you have this urge, and you know it means to do something more than what you're doing right now. But we have all these inbuilt habits to sort of convert that urge back into the normal orbit of things rather than to do something that could actually educate and transform us. So, you know, it's very optimistic in the sense that we are built with the capacity to feel our willingness to engage in that encounter more deeply. And we know it has something to do with a shift. We know it has something to do with adding in another mode of experience that we could integrate in a different way. But we have all these mechanisms that keep us from doing that in a way that would transform us. So any kind of educational culture that can help us discern what actually makes a difference on the basis of the impulses we're built with. That sounds good.
That sounds good to me too, and I'm down. Sounds good. Sign me up. I'm going to be in that reality show if we smell that. I think it's a brilliant point. I'll just say quickly is that we see a flower. It's a very concrete example. Our natural causality now is to take a picture with the phone, not to smell it, not to touch it. Right there is where Gurdjieff is like, that's why I'm saying you need different practices. You're too comfortable with taking pictures. You don't even realize what you're missing. Like as a spiritual practice, it would be you're only allowed to take pictures of things you touch. If you don't touch it, you're not allowed to take the picture until you touch it. Right there is a kind of short circuiting of the technological essence you're habituated to that you don't know of. Everyone watching this, you can do this now. You can say, a spirit, I'm only allowed to take 5 pictures at a party, and then I'm not allowed to take pictures anymore. And I got to tell all my friends too, we are going to agree that 5 pictures and that's it. So we don't take the whole time at you. We don't go to parties to take pictures of being at parties, right? We're only allowed to take pictures of flowers we smell, or that we are going to put in a vase. I'm taking a picture, I'm about to cut it. So the reason I'm taking a picture is to have a certain testament to the moment before I cut it and put it into a vase, right? That's what you're doing, is thinking in a manner to short circuit your habits that you engage, that have been pre-configured by a technology that you don't even realize has happened. You've become so habituated to taking a picture of the flower without touching it that you don't even know it has happened. And that's what Gurdjieff can, I think, help us realize. I think if we don't realize that, we will continue to find ourselves missing out on nutritious experiences and not even knowing we're missing out of it. And when we find out we're not nourished, we won't know how to get it back. But someone like you and Gurdjieff can help us get it back. So thank you for your work, Layman Pascal.
It's a great, simple exercise that would work for people. And the next step would be to apply a rule to the digital camera in their own minds.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. That's exactly right. Exactly. To make sure that memories have smells. Work to get to the place where memories are not just things you see in your mind, but make them also smell. So I'm going to smell the deep fry that Gurdjieff is cooking up. And I think, I think that Mars is really missing out for not having that cooking culinary genius. It's Mars's loss. But the fact that the book is banned on Mars means there's more copies for us. So that I am glad about.
We'll get him. I've got a great lawyer. I'm very confident. Always nice to talk to you, man. I got to jump off onto the next call, but
Yes,
maybe
sir.
next time we'll do Lovecraft.
I look forward to it. Thank you. Always a pleasure, Layman Pascal. Best to you, sir.
Great.
Thank you so much.